All right, it looks like we've got a sort of decent amount of people here, so why don't we kick off this morning? Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm Katie. I'm part of the Makers team, and it's great to have you here today. For those of you who are with us for the first time, Makers works to transform people's lives by combining education and employment. And through our 16-week bootcamp, we give our students, many of which who are career changers, the skills to thrive in modern tech teams. And once they've graduated, we connect them with employers. For the businesses that we also work with, we work to advise on hiring, onboarding processes, diversity strategies, and how to best introduce juniors into their workforces. Whether that's hiring makers directly out of the bootcamp or through our junior support programs or apprenticeship programs as well. And so we're excited to run today's masterclass in partnership with Octopus Ventures, who are a venture capitalist firm with the likes of Depop, Super, Grays, and many more. And it's great to see actually many of you here today. So just before we jump into today's session, I'd love to do a little bit of housekeeping if possible. It'd be great if everyone can make sure their microphones are turned off just while the presentations are going. We will also be holding a Q&A after all the speeches, so feel free to submit any of your questions within the chat as we go or at the end, and we will address these once the speakers have finished. We will be recording the session, which we will share with you in an email after the session, and feel free to share this with anyone within your teams. And as part of that follow-up as well, we will share a feedback form where you can request or share topics that you would also like us to include in our masterclass event series. So why don't we kick things off? So today's topic, building greatness through better mentoring. Most companies advocate mentoring, but when it comes to the finer details, many encounter unwanted challenges. A lack of structure and unclear goals for the mentor and the mentee can lead to breakdown of the mentoring programs, or even reluctance to participate in them at all. Due to this, both junior and senior team members can miss out on that sort of vital learning opportunities and also fall short of reaching their potential. So today's speakers are going to tackle these problems from a range of different perspectives and hopefully help reframe your approach as a mentor and help you understand goals, accountability, and we'll also hear a first-hand account of the challenges and successes of going through a mentoring program as well. So our first speaker today is Alice Luthier. She's a former developer at Facebook. She went on to become CTO of She Can Code. She's now head of coaching at Makers and is passionate about coaching and supporting developers to reach their full potential. Today, she's breaking down the different levels of skill mastery and sharing how teaching skills and behaviours are the best way to accelerate developers within your team. So Alice, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, as Katie said, I am the head of coaching here at Makers, and I'm really passionate about helping people, all sorts of people, become software developers. And so today, what I wanted to share is a little bit how we, like a bit of a part of our education philosophy and how we help people in the hope that you can use it when you're mentoring or when you're onboarding new developers into your own companies or around you. So let me start here. Let me start here. So here, what you see is a pyramid, and this pyramid is one of the fundamental ideas of Makers' philosophy. And this idea is that everything you learn you can learn on several different levels. You can learn at the level of concrete. So that's maybe, oh, what's the syntax to write a function in Ruby? That's very concrete fact, right? You can learn on the level of concepts. So concepts would be, after you've written a bunch of functions in Ruby, following the syntax, you can think more about what is a function? How do I, like, what do they do? Why would you use them? This type of questions. What is it? Why? And then if you, and then the idea is that the next level emerges from that. So the concept emerged from the concrete, and then the skills emerge from you having spent quite a bit of time handling concretes and handling concepts, and you'll build your skills, which is you'll build your way to use functions in any place. You'll know what steps to take. You know how to unblock yourself. You've developed processes, and that's really important for us. And then behaviors is even at the top of this, when you start to realize that actually, you know, this programming concept could be used in any part of your life. In fact, if you think of goal setting and you've learned TDD in programming, you realize, well, it's just the same. So behavior is when it's so ingrained that now it's part of your core identity. And I want to say that most of the time, developers out in the world, either self-taught or who went through university, they've done a bunch of concretes because they've practiced programming, and then at uni they learn a lot of concepts. But uni doesn't bother teaching you the skills as much. They just rely on this really important fact that skills and behaviors will just emerge from you doing enough concretes and concepts. And that's true, and it works, but it takes years. And at Makers, we don't have years to create developers who will have those skills. And so because it's 3 months, we have made some choices. And the choice we make is that we focus on the skills and behavior as opposed to focusing on the concepts and concretes. So there are some reasons for that. First of all, the concepts and concretes are parts of tech that evolve all the time, especially the concretes. Syntax of things evolves all the time. And great material about concrete and concepts can be found online. And in fact, it's a little bit pretentious to believe that you're going to be the bootcamp that creates the best material out there about every single concrete when it changes all the time. However, skills and behaviors are not things that you can pick up online as much. Skills and behavior come from working with experienced developers, and that's where the coaches come in. And so as coaches, what we do is we really focus on skills and behavior as opposed to concepts and concretes. Developers will work with concepts and concretes during bootcamp, but every time they come to us, we try to really engage with them on the level of skills and behavior. And if you think of learning a language, this is a little bit as if you were like concepts and concretes are the vocabulary, and they'll make sentences, but skills and behavior is like teaching them the grammars, teaching them a rule to make a whole new sentence based on the vocabulary that they know. And I'm going to show you how to do this in practice. So let's think of an example. You have someone who comes to you with a very specific question. That's very common. That's something I see in the bootcamp every day. When developers come to us, typically they're blocked on something. They have code and it's not working. They have a specific error. They don't know how to solve it. And if you're in a company, I'm sure you see a lot of new developers come to you with very specific bug, very specific problem. And when you have some experience of the code that they're working on, it's quite common that you actually know exactly what is going wrong. You've seen this 20 times, you know exactly what is wrong, and you could absolutely engage there and say, well, did you forget maybe that line in the config? Or maybe here, are you passing a number instead of a string? You can engage that way, but if you're doing that, you're missing something big. First of all, it makes you look like you're a wizard. And this is something that already exists in spades in the tech industry. You don't want people to feel like experienced devs have this innate knowledge. They just know right away what things are. I'll never get there. So it can be quite discouraging when someone answers to you on that wizard level, right? And it's actually rare to have questions. A lot of developers maybe will feel a little bit a bit shame. I don't know if shame is the right word, but they will not necessarily ask a question for fear of feeling stupid. And if you answer like a wizard, you may make them feel stupid, even though you're really, really, really trying to be helpful. And so if you have a question, to me, you really need to seize that opportunity, because it's a rare opportunity for learning. Let me give you a metaphor here. So imagine when you have a dev, a new dev who's working on a tech problem, a lot of the time this is what they see. Look at this image. This is maybe what they're seeing. And if you ask them, if you're seeing this image, and I ask you, what needs to come to the right of this? If I was to continue painting this image on the right, what needs to come? Well, you don't know. It's hard to know, because when you're a junior, you're so close to the picture that you don't know what is happening. And when you're an experienced dev, instead, this is what you see, right? You have the context, you have the whole picture. And so for you, it's really easy to say, well, if they ask you, what do I need to write at the right of this? You could say, well, just put a little bit more black, and then you'll put a band of white, and then kind of like a curve of black. But if you just tell them that, they may be able to get to the solution, but they will never really have learned how to get them themselves. So what you want is to share what you see. And so let's look at how you can do that. So here are a few different things that makers coaches do when asked a question. The first one is asking the devs more questions. And this is important because it may be that actually the developer who's coming to you is really close to finding the answer, right? And maybe it's just a small thing that they haven't seen, but by asking them 1 or 2 questions, they'll solve it themselves. And if you can get that, then it's the best, absolute best outcome. Because if they solve it themselves, it really increases their confidence, and they know they can do it. So absolutely always the first thing to try, ask them more questions to try and see, what are they seeing? Are they at this point, or are they at this point, or are they somewhere between where they can already kind of help themselves? Now, if they're not seeing, or if it doesn't just take 1 or 2 questions, what you can do is describe your process. Don't answer the question by saying this is what you need to do, but instead imagine that this is the very first time you're meeting this error. How would you do it? How would you solve it? What would you research? Who would you ask? How do you navigate the documentation here? Where do you print in your code to get answers? And so at Makers, because we do a lot of skills and processes, we think a lot about those processes, and we have kind of thought about what are the different steps of different processes, what are the steps of debugging. But this still has its limitation. If you just describe your process, the really difficult part is that you can only describe something that you've really thought about, right? And a lot of the time, actually, you do, as a programmer, you do a lot of things that you're not even conscious of. And so when that fails, what you want to do is actually model it for them. And this, to me, is the most powerful tool you have with junior developers, or any developer, really. And it's that they will learn by observing you in your process, because there are many things that we do unconsciously, as I said. So one example would be, if I Google, the way I choose my search terms, they're not random. I would have a hard time describing how I chose those terms, but they're not random either. And if someone observes me, then they may actually see a difference that I have a hard time putting into words, because I just have chunked that knowledge, and now I don't think about it anymore. Another thing is, when I write code, I don't write code top to bottom. I typically write the start of a function and the end, and then I fill in the middle. And sometimes, if I need a helper function, I will use it right there and then, even before I've written the core of it. But this thing, that I can tell it to you now, because I have modeled it for devs, and they've pointed that, wait, you don't just write code top to bottom. And now I have reflected, and now I know that these things are things that I do. But devs will pick them up by observing you, even if you don't know your own process. And this is where modeling is the most powerful. Pairing with someone and just doing what you do and let them ask the question. This is what helps. And then finally, the last thing that you want to do after you've done all of this, they have come with an error or a problem or a question, and you've asked them some questions to see where they are. You have described your process. You have modeled it for them. Now you want to reflect with them. How would they now describe that process? How would they solve a similar problem in the future? And reflect here at this point. What it means is that it just multiplies this experience. Instead of having to, for years, write a lot of different pieces of code and then see emerging concepts and processes. Now, maybe they've written 1 or 2 pieces of code, but through this reflection, they can multiply it and make each piece of code they write worth, weeks of practice. So hopefully these tips have helped you think about how to engage with questions from developers. And that's pretty much all I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alice. That was great. And a lot of sort of insight and tips for us to sort of go away. Thank you. Just a quick reminder, if there are any questions, feel free to post it in the chat as we go, and we can address them at the end. But next up, we've got Kimberly Cook. She's the director and trustee at COBA, a coding charity that facilitates the growth of a diverse tech community by running free regular programming workshops for underrepresented groups in tech. She'll be speaking on how to create an environment for a successful mentor-mentee relationship and how you can prepare your team for taking on junior developers. Kimberly, over to you.
Thank you. I realised I forgot to unmute myself. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. One comment on that last talk is that I always say that knowing what to Google is a skill in itself, and actually that can be so hard. So yeah, great talk. Great talk. So my name's Kimberly Cook. As mentioned, I'm a software engineer. I've been an engineer for 8 years, and I'm also a COBA trustee. So I'm here to talk about COBA. And the relationship that you can have when hiring a junior developer. So who is COBA? We are a charity that facilitates the growth of a diverse tech community by running free programming workshops. We started in October 2013, purely out of the lack of diversity in tech and frustration. We were 3 female engineers, and I realized that I was a couple of years into my career and I'd still never worked with another female engineer. And it did actually take me 6 years before working with one. And so that's really how COBA came about. And so how do we do this? We run programming workshops. We did start in London, and we now have this idea of chapters. And that idea at the beginning wasn't a thing, and it started because someone was coming up from Brighton every week to attend our London workshop, and she said, "Can I start a COBA in Brighton?" And we said, yes. And so that's how this idea of chapters came about. And it was nice because we never set out to do that. And since then, we've started 35 chapters around the world. Our workshops are different to a lot of workshops in that we don't have a teacher and like a classroom format. We pair one student with another student who's working on a very similar thing or the same tutorial, and then we assign them a coach. So we describe it as lots of small groups pair programming. So you can see in some of the pictures on the screen that there are lots of little groups and they're all working on different things. We also do run one-off tailored events, but they're quite niche, but our general workshops have this format. We realized really early on that the teacher, classroom format wasn't really working, because when you're learning a new skill, that's really scary. And we found that that people were hesitant to ask questions in front of loads of people. And so when we changed the format, we realized that it was a lot more welcoming, and people asked way more questions because they were less intimidated. Our workshops don't look like this anymore because we have gone completely virtual. We now run them on Discord, but Discord allows for this idea of rooms, and so we still pair people in these virtual rooms, and they still do the thing exactly as they would. They just unfortunately don't look like this anymore. And one thing we have said is that we've seen a huge benefit to virtual events, and so because we can allow way more people to come, you don't have to be in one of our set locations, and so that idea of virtual event is still going to happen when things go back to normal. So since we started, we've ran 1,446 workshops. We've ran 119 one-off events and 50 monthly events. So our monthly events is a speaker series, and that started because one of our students came to us and said, I've been to a few events in London, but I've noticed that all the talks are for experienced developers, and I'm really confused. And they're using terminology that I don't really understand. So they said, can I start something at CodeBar where the talks are for junior developers or people starting their career? And so that happened. And it was really amazing because it started from someone in our community, and it's still running, and we've run 50 events. So in total, in the 7 years, we've run 1,615 events. This is how many members we've had join and attend CodeBar since we've started, 17,122. That number is probably a bit more now. This number was taken last week. So 12,254 of that number is students. So those people that have come along to a CodeBar and learned to code, and 4,868 are coaches. So those are experienced developers who have come along and helped teach our students. One really nice thing that happens at CodeBar is people change from student to coach. So one thing we notice that when someone's been maybe attending CodeBar for a couple of months, 6 months, and they've got their first job, they then like to come back and coach. So I think we've had about 20% of our attendees transition from student to coach, which is really nice. And for us, that's one of the nicest feelings when someone says, oh, I've been a student for 6 months and now I'm coming and I'm going to coach for the first time, but I'm a little bit scared. And that's always a really nice scenario for us. So as I mentioned, we've got 35 chapters all around the world. We've now got 31 active, so 4 have stopped. And these are our locations: London, Brighton, Cambridge, Birmingham, New York City, Manchester, West London, Bournemouth, Edinburgh, Barcelona, Berlin, Glasgow, Oxford, Sydney, Kent, Helsinki, Oslo, Accra, Norwich, Peterborough, Bristol, Shanghai, Savannah, Houston, Boston, Reading, Amsterdam, and our new one, Drammen, who haven't run a workshop yet. We set that up a few weeks ago. So yeah, we are now global. We are now international, which for us is absolutely amazing that we've managed to grow really organically and really truly grassroots. And as part of CodeBar, we have a job board. And one thing we noticed when we released this job board a few years ago is that we were helping people learn to code, but then what were we doing? And so we were like, well, let's create a junior dedicated job board, because when we looked, there were lots of job boards out there, but none for junior developers, none that were truly junior. Because one thing we noticed when we did see a junior job was, oh, this is junior, but you need 1 year to 2 years industry experience. And for our students, that just wasn't feasible. We have a lot of people who are transitioning careers, so they will have experience in a field, but not necessarily tech. And so all the jobs that go onto our board are filtered by us. They have to have a salary and a reasonable salary. Like if we get one coming in from London that says 18,000, we just will not accept that, because that just is not a livable wage in London. And yeah, we will say no. If one requires you to have a computer science degree, we'll say, you know, is this really a requirement, or are you just adding it because you've been told you need to add it? Because another thing we noticed is when we would give someone feedback on the job that they gave to us, they would say, oh, well, we've listed that, but we don't really mind about that. And so we would say, well, you know, particularly as women, you know, when there's a statistic that when women look at a job ad, you know, they want to be able to do everything, otherwise they won't apply. And so I didn't want jobs to go on here that say you have to do this, and this, but actually we don't mind if 50% of these, you know, you don't do. And so some of the companies, we work with them on their job ad and their listing to make it more inclusive to particularly our community, because, you know, our community is diversity, you know, women, non-binary, LGBT and ethnic minorities. And unfortunately, we want to open up these opportunities. And sometimes it just requires a bit of wording tweaks so that it's more appealing to, you know, particularly minority group members. And so the second part of this talk is I'm going to talk to you about hiring a junior developer, the benefits, but also the things that if you're going to do it, the things that you should be mindful of to ensure that it's a good experience for that junior developer. So the benefits, onboarding is improved for everyone. So one thing when I spoke to people in our community about what their experience was of hiring a junior developer, they said, well, we had to look at our onboarding to make sure that it all made sense, that everything that we wanted to say was there. And they said, and then we found that this improved for everyone across the company because they'd looked into it. And so onboarding had improved. It raised the code standard because they weren't writing super complex code that wasn't readable, that makes it really hard for any new member to come and join a team. I've joined a team and there were so many abstractions in this code that is quite hard to get to grips with. And so, you know, and there's a lot of abbreviations I found in a company that I joined that I was like, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And then even like function names, variable names, you know, some of them were just really hard to understand as someone joining a new team. And so, yeah, it raised the code standard generally across, you know, the whole product. Documentation improved because they had to make sure that it was all documented correctly. One of the first things that I always do when I join a company is when I have to get the project set up, I can guarantee that there's something in the README missing. And so normally my first PR, I'm a freelancer, and normally the first PR I do is changing the README because there's always one small thing change, you know. And so, and documentation on, you know, if it's a product, you know, why you've built this, like why have you chosen to use React? If it's an app, why have you chose to use React Native instead of a native app, you know? And so, yeah, documentation generally across, you know, the whole company and product improved. Great opportunity to other engineers to mentor. If you speak to some mid to senior developers, some of them will say, you know, one thing I really want to get into is mentoring. And so you can give that opportunity to your team members who really want to do that and give that opportunity. Exposure to new technologies. So if you've got a lot of experienced developers, they may not be as excited to explore new technologies. And you'll find that if you've got a junior developer, you know, someone fresh out of a boot camp, you know, someone who's self-taught, they are so excited by these new technologies, learning new skills. And so you may find that actually you get exposure to a lot of new technologies for your product. Developers gain skills that are beneficial to the team. So as I mentioned, mentoring is a huge one. You know, communication is a really good one. You know, being able to communicate with other super non-technical people is a really important skill. And you're giving someone their foot in the tech door. You know, one of the things that I find when speaking to CodeBar students is getting that first job and that first industry experience is the hardest thing. And if you're giving someone that opportunity, even if it's a 3-month internship, you know, you are helping someone start their career, and they will forever remember you as the company that helped them start their career because you're the first one. And so you are helping people start their tech career. But, a big but, I don't think you should just hire a junior developer. There are things that you should bear in mind, and I've gathered a lot of this information. I've spoken to a few people in our community. I've spoken to people who have hired juniors, and I've spoken to a few developers in our community who are fairly new in their career, from someone who was 1 month, and I spoke to someone who was 2 years into their career, and I asked them, what things could your company have done? And so I've collated this list of feedback from them. This isn't from me. I'm the messenger at this point. So the main thing is prepare. If your junior joins and you've not prepared for it, and you haven't got a clear spec of what you want that junior developer to work on, it can be really confusing for them, and you really want that junior developer to know what skills they're going to be needing in those first few months, so that maybe they can prepare prior to the job. So you can say, we want someone to come and help us on this, and in the first 3 months, you will be working on this. So it helps them know what skills, and also plan. So if they know that by the 3rd month, I'm going to need to learn a bit of internationalization, they can prepare that. They can maybe learn a bit of that in their spare time, or if they've got a bit of downtime at work. So you're just helping them have a clear structure of what their first 3 months are going to be in their job. And it'll also help you, because you'll know, okay, we're not just joining in and we're not sure what they're going to do. You'll also have a very clear idea of what they're going to do. And the people that I spoke to said the first 3 months are the best, is as much as you should prepare for. Second bit is find a mentor for that junior developer. So speak to your existing team and say, we're going to hire a junior developer. Is there anyone here who wants to mentor that junior developer? Is there anyone here who wants to, let them shadow, and you'll find that there will be someone there who can help that junior developer. And you also want that junior developer to know that there's someone there who they can speak to, because that's super important. It's that developer needs a mentor, so that they can go to that someone and ask them questions. And the second part to this is, I think when you find that mentor and you've hired your junior developer, and that first meeting with the junior developer and their mentor, set boundaries and set goals. So, the junior developer to say, here's what I want to accomplish. And the mentor to say, here's also what I want to accomplish, so that they both know exactly what they're both going to gain from having this relationship. And the boundaries are super important, because if the experienced developer is, say, a parent, and they say, just to let you know, I probably won't respond to emails in the evenings or weekends, because I've got a child, or I'm a carer, or there could be many other reasons. That then junior developer will know, okay, I'm not going to message them at 9 o'clock at night, because they're not going to respond. And so setting those boundaries, I think, is super important, and the goals, so that you both know, that both parties know exactly what's going to happen from this relationship. One of the developers that I spoke to, who was 2 years into her career, she said one of the best things her company did for her was give her a personal development plan. And she put that together with her mentor. And she said it gave her a really clear focus of what she needed to do, what skills she was going to learn. And she also said that when she looked back on it a month later, she could really clearly see her progression. She could really see what skills she'd learned and how she developed, and how her confidence had grown in that time. And there's also so many things that you don't realize you don't know yet when you join a company. And so seeing that progression is super important for that person's development. And again, like I mentioned earlier, very clear expectations. You can't expect to hire a junior developer and within a week they're going to be submitting big pull requests to your code base, because depending on where they come from, they may never have heard the word Scrum before. agile. They may never have even looked at something like Jira before. What are story points? All of these things that are new to people joining tech, that it's not just the code base they need to get to grips with. There are so many other things to do with that company that take time, and so as a company as well, those having expectations of, okay, well, maybe for the first month, it's all going to be new to them. We need to give that person time to learn and get to grips with everything. And, even small things like, when you're not so much now because we're working from home, but particularly when you're in a new company, like, where can I go for lunch? Where's the toilets? There are so many small things when you start a new job that you have to think about, that you forget if you've been in your company for a couple of years, because you're like, yeah, I know where the tea bags are. Yeah, I know how to make a coffee. Yeah, I know where the toilets are. But all of that stuff is new to someone. And if you're new to tech, there's even more to learn, because there's also, like I said, Scrum, Jira, lots of other technical things that, are a lot to learn. And so, don't expect someone to come in and be, merging big pull requests within a week, because, that probably won't happen. And another thing that came out was having structured and unstructured conversations. So you don't want all your conversations with this developer, particularly now when we're virtual. I think it's more important now than ever to go out of your way to have these unstructured conversations. But if you're hiring a junior developer, you don't want their only conversations with team members to be, morning stand-ups, retros, story point meetings, estimations, because how are you going to get to know these people? And so if you go, it's lunchtime, or, just after lunch, do you want to just grab a cup of tea? Let's just have a cup of tea or a coffee, and let's just jump on Zoom. I want to get to know you. It's harder now. If you were in an office environment, you would probably sit and have a cup of tea and, your morning cups of tea and stuff. So I think now virtually more than ever, you have to go out of your way to have these unstructured conversations. And the developer who I spoke to said that those unstructured conversations were the biggest part of making her feel like part of the team. And so those are super important. This was a really nice one that came out of it. It was combining asking with offering. So when you're joining a new team, you're asking a lot of questions, oh, where's this? Oh, this thing's in the code base. What's this? And so if you're an experienced developer, you could offer some of these things to the junior developer of, I'll be working on this. Do you want to pair this afternoon? Or, oh, I see you're working on that particular feature. I've actually got some experience in that. So do you want to pair on it? So offer out so that junior developer doesn't feel like they're asking all the time, because if someone's asking all the time, they don't want to feel like they're annoying. They don't want to feel like they're a nag. They don't want to feel silly. And so offer to ask more and be like, yeah, I'm working on this thing. Do you want to pair for half an hour? And then they'll be able to get to know the code base a bit more. They'll get to know, that particular feature, if it's a complex feature. And again, from that, you may get an unstructured conversation. And so a lot of these things can be linked. And so this I think was one of my favorite that come out of some of the conversations that I had, these offers, and it would just make that junior feel like they are part of the team, and they're not annoying by asking, all of these questions. This was one that come out, and someone just simply said, don't take a junior developer if your team culture isn't welcoming. So, if you think, oh, there's a few things about our team that I would like to change, work on that before hiring the junior developer, because you don't want to bring the junior developer into a team that maybe the culture isn't great, or there's a thing that you want to work on. And so, yeah, this one did make me laugh. And I was like, anything else? And they went, no, just don't take on one if the culture's crap. and it kind of made me laugh. But I do think it's super important, to consider what your current team culture is like, and whether that would be a welcoming place for, a junior developer. Give yourself a year and see how it goes. If you've never taken on a junior developer, or never done an internship before, give yourself a year and experiment. If you're starting with 3 months with that internship, and at the end of that 3 months you go, oh, next time I'd want it to be 4 or 5 or even 6 months, experiment, particularly with an internship, because you might find that actually you want to keep that person on. And so you may then offer them the job, but give yourself a year, see how it goes, and also get advice. Seek out to companies, who have got that experience. Like if you've got a friend at another company who have taken on a junior developer, say, what did you do? Like, how did you make sure that person, was comfortable? Maybe ask people on your team as well, like, depending on what experience they've got. Like, do you remember being a junior developer? Like, what really worked for you? Like, what would you have wished had happened? And you'll be really surprised what might happen, from those conversations that will arise from just asking your team members, their experience, if they remember what it was like being a junior developer. And that's it. That's all my tips and things that I've got for hiring a junior developer and a mentee-mentor relationship. So huge thank you, and thank you, Makers, for organising this.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. That was great. Definitely some great pointers there to take on board, some what can be just quite simple changes. But next up, we've got Georgiana Babanta, and she is the Portfolio Talent Manager at Octopus Ventures. And she'll be speaking about mentoring within a scale-up and how to maximize engagement and fulfillment of your mentees. So Georgiana, I'll pass on to you.
1 second. I'm trying to start my video, but it says that, okay. Can anyone see my screen?
We can. Yeah, we can now see the document.
So the mentoring within a scale-up one.
That's the one.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. As Katie said, I'm a portfolio talent manager at Octopus Ventures. And for those of you that don't know us, we are one of the largest and most active venture investors in Europe. Our core team has been together since 2008, and we invest in areas we believe will change the world for the better, like health, money, deep tech, and consumer. Our mission is to help pioneers change the world. And to date, we've backed the founding teams of nearly 100 companies, such as Zoopla, Secret Escapes, Depop, and LV. Prior to Octopus Ventures, I led the talent function at a London-based tech startup called Paddle. You might have heard of them. They just raised their Series C and they kind of plastered it all over the internet. But part of my role at Paddle was to do a lot of engineering hiring. And part of that journey took me to a partnership with Makers to hire junior engineers. And I would like to talk to you today about why we thought it was valuable to hire junior engineers. And I think Kimberly made some really excellent points here, so I'm going to try not to repeat them. How we helped them develop at Paddle, and how Makers supported our efforts in achieving this. Also, having seen everyone else's slides, mine are considerably less professional looking, but I stand behind them. So 1 second. So why we decided to hire junior talent? Well, I actually read an article recently which said that there are more job openings than there are senior engineers to fill them. And it had like some interesting graphs that show like the amount of job openings versus the amount of senior engineers, and the amount of junior engineers looking for a job versus the amount of junior engineers that actually get hired. So I guess the most important thing to say here is that we had a business need. We were struggling to hire senior engineers, and we wanted to experiment, give ourselves a year, like Kimberly said, and see what value having like a junior engineer scheme will bring to the business. We also wanted to rebalance the engineering teams a little bit. So there is a lot of research out there, so I'm not going to talk about it, around like balancing your teams with senior, mid-level, and junior talent. So at Paddle, I think we did a great job of hiring like the initial team with like very senior members and a lot of really great mid engineers. but we were a bit, I guess, reluctant to take the risk and bring in more junior talent. So we wanted to correct that. And another thing, it was around looking to bring more diversity into the company. And this was particularly on gender. So when I joined the business, I was the fourth woman in a team of 40. So these are both like really important things on the CEO's agenda and mine. And realistically speaking, we just struggled to hire female engineers that were more senior or more experienced, because most of them were just like happily employed. Our engineers also wanted the opportunity to give back. So Paddle had a team of strong engineers that were eager to give back and at the same time develop the training and mentorship skills. We had people that were looking to grow into managers, and we wanted to kind of give them a stepping stone to that. So we wanted to pair them with some junior engineers and give them the opportunity to, I guess, trial those skills. And Kimberly touched on this already, but mentoring can be such a rewarding experience, both for the mentee and the mentor. We also believed that junior engineers are valuable. So with the right mechanism in place, they are most likely to spot new solutions to old problems. They provide a fresh pair of eyes to specific projects and sometimes an entire industry. And if you're looking at like Y Combinator, like a lot of the founders, or like most of the founders are in their 20s rather than in their 30s. And they have amazing ideas around like reshaping technology and reshaping whole other industries. And junior engineers in general, they tend to be more amenable to working on small but essential routine tasks, which can free up a lot of more senior developers' work so they can focus on larger structural issues. We also had like a leadership team that advocated for junior talent. So the VP of engineering at Paddle, we used to work together at Just Eat prior to joining Paddle. And he had seen firsthand, because Just Eat had like a strong junior scheme for engineers and like other more commercial roles. So he had seen firsthand the experience, how amazing it can be to bring junior talent into the business, and how like experiences can be quite overrated while motivation is underrated. And I think startups are particularly guilty of this, as they think they don't have like the tools, the budget, the time to hire or like develop individuals, even though arguably like they offer the best environment for growth, just because like they scale so much and you have so many challenges that you throw at the person in the span of a year that they like really grow and like step up. They're also, I think, like one of the pluses of like hiring junior engineers is that they learn to work with your methodology. So they're like less set in their ways and they're a bit more flexible. They bring passion and curiosity to the workplace. We've experienced this like firsthand when I was working at Paddle. And they're not jaded by industry and past roles. So they have a lot of energy and like eagerness to believe in your mission and the feasibility of like your company's technological path. And speaking from like personal experience, I think it's always refreshing to see your place of work through the eyes of a junior employee. And kind of like, we tried our best to support them in their development. And when I was working at Paddle, I guess my mission and my department's mission was to create a great company to be at, come from, and return to. So what does that actually mean? It means that we wanted to make sure that Paddle's employees were happy to be there. Paddle becomes a business that it's recognized in the industry to hire a high quality of talent, and that our former employees return to Paddle on more senior roles. So we give them the environment to develop and grow. Then they reach a natural cap, they leave the business, spread their wings, and then they come back leading like a function. And I guess like also like again, Kimberly made some excellent points here, but I really believe that first impressions matter. So I feel like the main challenge with hiring junior talent, particularly if you're doing it through a scheme like Makers, where you choose a few people and then you support them to go through the Makers program, is you have to be clear about your selection criteria, because they have very little technical skills that you can evaluate them on. So you have to, before you even like embark on this journey, you have to think, okay, what do we want from a junior engineer? What a good junior engineer looks like for our size and our industry. And I think some of the things that we focus on testing during the interview process were like curiosity, genuine interest in learning about Paddle's product, how it works, excitement for tech, obviously, great collaboration skills, eagerness to learn. And I think the most important thing for us was during the interview process, we really try to understand what they expect and be super honest about whether or not we can or cannot fulfill those expectations. So just to give you an example, so like some junior engineers maybe would like exposure to various tech departments. So you have companies that rotate them from like, development, DevOps, testing, support. We didn't have these departments. Like our engineers were doing their own testing. We barely had a DevOps department or we didn't like really had an IT support department. So we wanted people that wanted to like build their programming skills and wanted to focus on that and wanted to be part of a software department and work towards developing an application or some features. We also, when we hiring, and this is coming back to like that first impressions matter, we really wanted to make sure they had like a great interviewing experience. So kind of how we did it, and I guess like everyone can structure it in the way that works best for them, is we had the day kicked off by the CEO, because like I said, our leadership team was really bought into the idea of hiring junior talent. And, he sat in front of the business and shared like a very inspirational story about like, we believe in junior talent because I started Paddle when I was 17. And, I had no experience, just a dream and really poor PHP skills. And look where I am now. So I want to kind of give back and support others because I really believe you guys are talented. And then kind of how we structured the days, we did an assessment center. So we had, we tested their collaboration team skills via team exercises. And then we had individual interviews. And we tried not to make them like present, put like a panel of interviewers, put them in front of a panel of interviewers because that can be stressful. And one thing that we really try is to create like an inclusive interview team. So we paired like one female employee with one man employee, with one like man, so we can have like more diversity into the interview. And I guess like another really important thing, and Kimberly said that it's very hard for juniors to get their first role. I think it's very disheartening when they don't get it. So we try to give them feedback and very mindful feedback. So we knew from the start, and we communicated that with Makers, that we wanted to take only two. We wanted to run an experiment with 2 junior engineers. And we had, I think, 10 or 11 people that showed up that were interested in the business. So we wanted to be very mindful about them, because I think it can be very disheartening when you've just like barely started your career or your journey into engineering and then you get so many rejections. So, we wanted to, like, when we gave them feedback, we explained, we only had 2 roles. It was a tough choice. We gave them words of encouragement, wished them the best of luck on their path to become engineers, and genuinely like encourage them to reapply when they see another suitable opening. And then on like the onboarding piece, I think one of the key things is when they start, you have to have something for them to work on, and you need to set some like onboarding objectives with some KPIs around that. So you can't be like, oh yeah, they'll start and then we'll see. We'll like find something for them to work. You kind of need to scope that before, and you need to have a plan to understand how their first like 3 months, 6 months, 12 months will look into the business. Another important thing in onboarding would be to live and breathe your culture, and talk about like the behaviors you value in engineering and in your company and how they can display them. So they have like an understanding of what's expected of them, particularly now that it's remote, so they can't take like those social cues from like other engineers or like other members of the team. We tried our very best to create an epic welcome. Probably could have done better, but at least we made sure we introduced them to the business. So we gave them a chance to kind of do a bit of a presentation, about like their role, why they wanted to become an engineer, what they expect, share some funny stories. And we book time with like high-level executives because we want to show them, even though you're juniors, the leadership team is making time to tell you about their journey, their department, get to know you. And again, a very important thing is we put in place a buddy or mentor system with people that are always available for questions. Because I think, yes, as Kimberly mentioned, it's hard for people to always go to their manager and be that person that kind of nags them all the time. So having a buddy or a mentor, it's easier for them and they feel more comfortable sometimes going to that person. And understanding it's not all about technical skills. So yes, technical skills are important and we've put in place systems to kind of help them upskill, but it's not everything when it comes to developing junior engineers. And one of the main things that we try to do at Paddle was invest in building their confidence. So yes, via the buddy system, we also organize the regular hackathons. So every 2 months, Paddle organized the hackathon, and we encourage them to take part in that. And our VP engineer was very good at like empowering them to have a voice in team meetings, in engineering overall. We also encourage them to like share blog posts and like generally like talk about their experience and be more visible to the business. And then we try to also make them feel included and create a sense of belonging. I think key here is if you want to trial a program for a year, don't just hire one junior engineer. They need to build like a sense of camaraderie with other people at their level and support each other and progress together essentially. So we, like I said, we hired 2 people for the Makers program and we had like another junior engineer already in the team. So I think like they formed a nice little group together and it wasn't such a lonely experience. Again, reinforcing the fact that you need to make sure that they have a voice in the team. You have to have regular check-ins with them and weekly one-to-ones. Maybe get your HR department, if you have one, to also double check with them maybe once a month, particularly at the beginning. It's a good way to ask for feedback, see how you can do things better. And I guess like probably the other 2 like really important things is to keep them challenged and review their pay regularly. So I made a point earlier that junior engineers are more amenable to working on small but essential routine tasks. And while that is true, it doesn't mean that that's everything they can contribute to. So I think you need to keep giving, as their skills evolve, you need to keep giving them more and more challenging projects and let them work with the latest technologies and allow them to push engineering boundaries in general, because that's the only way that they can truly grow and develop. And on their pay, as they grow, again, you need to bump it at least to market rates appropriate to their competence and experience level. Because like, if you don't do that, like, and if you don't reward them and if you don't keep them challenged, what's going to happen? You should probably not even hire junior engineers unless you want to bear all the expense in your industry for training the next generations of engineers in your specialty and then having them leave you for like other companies. And just wanted to a little bit talk as my last point about the program that we had in place with Makers Academy and why it worked for us. So you can get a sense of whether or not this is something that might also work for you. So some of the reasons why we like partnering with Makers, they have a highly selective admissions process. So only 1 in 12 candidates are selected to join their bootcamp. Candidates come from like a wide range of backgrounds. So they have partnerships with Code First Girls and other similar organizations. Like I said, diversity was very important for us, particularly gender diversity. And I think around like 35% of like makers right now are women. They also made it very easy to identify, hire, and develop junior engineering talent. So they were very flexible. They modeled their approach to match our requirements. They offer a great apprentice and employer experience. And they work directly with managers to make the apprenticeship a success. So they'll assign a dedicated solutions engineer who will then build like a delivery plan for the junior developers and work to progress that junior developer to mid in like around 12 months. And I guess like the last point was because they produce contribution ready engineers. So they don't just produce people who can do the basics. They also produce people that can apply professional grade processing using like any technology. And they have like a great track record of success. So I think 25% of makers are in mid-level positions after 1 year. And after 2 years, I think it's like around 65%. They follow engineering best practices, and actually Paddle had like a similar approach to software engineers, software engineering, which I think it's one of the reasons why the program went so well for them. So, you know, high quality code, like tested from the onset, selecting the best technology that would solve your problem, you know, only building features that add value, pair programming and agile practices. And I think it's best if you also hear from like one of Paddle's engineers. I want to kind of introduce one of my former colleagues from Paddle, Lynn Trio. She joined Paddle in early 2019 via the Makers Academy program. Prior to that, she was a management consultant, and she's now a software engineering at Paddle and also a coding instructor at Code First Girls. So Lynn, over to you.
Thank you. Would you mind stop sharing the screen? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, I'll present like this, if that's okay for now. The speaker view isn't working for me right now. Okay, hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Lynn, and I thought I'd run through, after those 3 fantastic talks, you've heard a bit about the theory, from someone from Makers, someone from CodeBar, and of course my ex-colleague from Paddle from recruitment side. We thought a nice way to bring this all together is to kind of give you like a holistic experience of someone who's gone through, you know, all those different phases of going from someone learning to code from the very beginning, all the way to a journey of someone who's right now a backend engineer. So I'll kick off. As a quick overview of my background, which Georgiana touched on, I'm currently a backend software engineer at Paddle. I'm also a tech coach and instructor for Code First Girls. Code First Girls are a social enterprise dedicated to teaching more women to learn to code for free. And I've been a coach for Code First Girls for about the last year or so, ever since becoming a software engineer at Paddle. I'm a career switcher. So before software development, I worked for around 7 years in finance, banking and management consulting. And it was in early 2019, I decided to make the plunge after loving to code and loving to build things for a few years, decided to take the plunge and join the Makers Apprenticeship Program with Paddle support. Although you can probably tell I'm a management consultant because I do love the power of free. And I thought what we'd do is we'd go over my experience as a mentee through sort of 3 different layers. The first layer is looking at sort of what was the experience for me as I got the job in the first place. The application process for me at Makers started off with the usual sort of make an initial application and providing my CV. After that point, sort of explaining my motivations in a text format to them, I was invited to do some, fulfill some tech requirements. So for Makers, there is, I think it differs year on year, but for me, I went through a Ruby course and showed my sort of tech competence and requirements at that point by showing my competence in coding in Ruby. Followed by that, I was then invited to a first interview to sort of discuss my motivations and sort of what are my expectations of why do I want to go on the apprenticeship, why do I want to become a software engineer. At that point, having been successful at that process, I was then invited to join sort of the hiring pool at the Makers Apprenticeship Program. This is the hiring pool of after having got through that rigorous application process for Makers Academy. I then waited for, I'm also kind of looking at a jobs board to see what sort of hiring partners Makers have available in order to offer junior engineering positions. For me, that was a couple of weeks later, fortunately, and I saw the Paddle junior application for an engineer available. I applied for them doing the typical sort of explaining my motivations once again, and I was invited to an assessment day with Paddle. I think Georgiana's been far too harsh on herself because I thought it was a fantastic assessment day, and it was a very nice welcome from them. But what I really appreciated from that event was the fact that, you know, I was working with my peers. So there were around 10 or 11 of us who were all vying for the same place. And rather than sort of a Hunger's Game evocative image you can think when someone is all battling for the same position, it was more extremely collaborative to me. And it meant that it showed to me, I guess, that if I were to join this company, they would really value collaboration above anything else. They value your ability to work through exercises and logical reasoning with your colleagues. And it was a certain camaraderie as well for my peers at the time who were also going through the assessment day. And then after successfully passing a group exercise and an interview, I got a successful offer from Paddle and Makers to join the apprenticeship program around summer last year. So moving on to then my study with Makers Academy. This was the 12-week intense bootcamp. So I think, when I think of it being 12 weeks, I'm kind of in shock. Like at the same time, I think, God, it was 12 weeks. It feels more like it flew past and it was almost like 2 weeks instead. And at the same time, I'm also thinking, God, I must have shaved about 5 years off my life in the course of those 12 weeks itself. A bootcamp is all about sort of how quickly you can pick something up and apply it. There's a new topic introduced every single week, a new technical topic introduced throughout the 12 weeks that builds on the previous week before. So it's kind of, it's quite a high pace and intense focused development that you experience whilst you're there. I've got sort of languages in brackets there because whilst at Makers, I did study predominantly in Ruby, JavaScript, obviously database languages, and those sort of languages. That wasn't the emphasis at all. The emphasis was that, okay, you might be studying Ruby now, and this is like a good object-oriented programming language you're going to learn. What was more important was us to learn the behaviors and the skills needed to apply the skills of OOP, of pair program, and agile and test-driven development. And most importantly, I guess, overall from that, whilst those skills evolved incredibly fast in this sort of environment, what was most crucial to it all was that it implemented the sort of culture of us as to be junior engineers. It implemented the culture of us of making sure we were able to ask the right questions and we were peer-to-peer learning. And by that, I mean, we weren't, the daily course of Makers Academy, it wasn't that we turned up to work and we were taught by sort of a lecturer at the front of a class, who was then going through, these are the bullet points, this is our learning objective for the day, this is how we're going to tell you how to get through this day and how you're going to learn, I don't know, polymorphism in object-oriented program. It wasn't that sort of makeup at all. It was much of the case of, here's a task for the day and this is what you should be achieving for this week, this skill. And now is your chance to pair with an individual from your cohort every single day and teach yourself this. Whilst at the time that was incredibly frustrating at Makers Academy, I will admit, in hindsight, it's something that was incredibly powerful, right? Because those peer-led learning skills is exactly what I'm doing every day as a junior engineer in Paddle. It's meant that I don't turn up to work and I look up our monolith code base, let's say in PHP, and I don't go to a colleague and say, you know, how do I fix this? What do I do? Please tell me the instructions. Instead, it's peer-led learning. I'm talking with my colleagues, my peers. I'm able to sort of research the right questions on Google to find myself the right answers. So instead of that expectation you might have otherwise got from a sort of formal classroom environment, it sort of implemented this behavior and really stuck with me that peer-led learning was crucial to my sort of development and my ongoing like future as a software engineer. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on the point of being part of Makers Academy was an incredible experience because I thought we were part of a cohort, every person joining Makers Academy on the apprenticeship or bootcamp in general is part of a wider cohort who are themselves going through the same experience. They're like-minded and incredibly motivated peers of mine who are also seeking a junior engineering job. And of course, as well as sort of gender diversity, there's also intellectual diversity and in our backgrounds as well. So on my cohort alone, from myself, who was a previous sort of chartered accountant, finance sort of background, I also had someone who was a Cambridge grad of chemistry to an ex-West End performer who is then trying to transition career into a developer. And that's just in my team alone, to be honest. That's not even going through the wider cohort of 30 of us or so. And lastly, I wanted to touch on after going through that experience at Makers for the 3 months, I stepped out into the real world with paddle. As this was an apprenticeship, this was lined up for me immediately after I finished the bootcamp. So it was amazing to not have the stress or worry whilst I was doing that bootcamp of having to seek that job. I'd already had that secured from the beginning because it was an apprenticeship. And after doing all of that at Makers, of the 3 months that I thought I'd learned an incredible amount, I was then of course, stepped out into the real world and completely introduced with a new tech stack and a whole new world of unknowns. So after spending 12 weeks coding in Ruby and C# or PHP, so after spending 3 months learning in Ruby, I then went on to paddle where I was working with PHP and Go on a daily basis. So 2 new languages. And then obviously there's a lot more to engineering than just the code. So of course I was working in a DevOps environment with Docker and AWS and other sort of new technologies that, it's not physically possible to cover every single new technology in Makers. So I wasn't introduced to those sort of software tools that were like Terraform and those new sort of emerging techs. So there was a whole new world of unknowns for me. At this point, however, I would say because of the sort of skills I'd learned from Makers and the sort of behaviors that I had implemented, I was kind of given a lot of opportunities to sort of learn those new skills. I think as an example, I had a mentor, of course, who I met on a regular basis, about once ad hoc meetings where we kind of paired on certain new tickets that I had, and it was most important rather than sort of seeing how to go through this step by step. It was important to look at, what was the thought process, what was the thinking process, how are we searching for these Google terms online or through the actual IDE, through the individual code lines, and understanding, what is it about this that makes me think I have a feeling this hypothesis is the answer to the issue. As well as, obviously, I continued, because I was on the apprenticeship, I continued with my Makers training on the job. So even in times where my direct colleagues weren't able to necessarily provide a very, very structured scheme of these are the things you should be learning over this month on month, because I was on the Makers apprenticeship, I was given that sort of de facto framework of these are the things you should know at the end of your junior apprenticeship year. So that was a real help for me in order to get the sort of academic theory on the side as well as doing my job day to day. And then I thought like a nice example of the sort of opportunities I got to test out my sort of new behaviors as a software developer is that we have a hackathon once a quarter at Paddle, as Georgiana mentioned. And for my first hackathon, I think the timing was that I was only 1 month into the job, and we thought it'd be a nice idea for all the junior engineers in that photo to sort of pair together and work on this project for 2 days rather. There was a real business problem in the sense of our sales team were had to manually sort out our sellers on a daily basis. We have our internal sort of sales categorization tool, but they have to manually sort of review someone's website and look at it and to classify it as a certain type of business. So we thought as junior engineers, we saw this as a real problem that our sales team were doing this on a daily basis for maybe 2 hours a day. So we thought a really nice way to do this was we could codify that and make a sort of web scraper that would enable them to sort of search each input a URL, so that there was a web scraper we could build for them that would scrape all the words from that website, and we'd codified it. If a company had this sort of syntax or this sort of language, they were more likely to be mapped to this sort of seller that we had categorized. So that was a real problem. We decided to tackle it. And instead of, I guess, even though we were learning 2 brand new languages as apprentices, we decided to just go for the best tools for the job. And we decided to give ourselves a crash course within the 2 days of learning Python. And even though it's not necessarily something we were familiar with, we were so confident that we had the ability to upskill ourselves immediately in order to produce, a working MVP on this product, because it couldn't be, because we didn't want it to be a thing that it wanted to be something that non-technical people could use. We also thought instead of making this in the command line, we wanted to make it for the users. So we made it available in the as a Google Chrome extension as well. Again, something we had very little understanding of beforehand. And obviously, as you can see at the end, we were successful and we won the hackathon. So that was a huge one of ours at the beginning of my career at Paddle. And I think that was my whistle-stop tour of my experience on the Paddle Makers apprenticeship program. Thank you for listening.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lynn. It's always great to sort of hear a first-hand experience of people going through a sort of mentoring and support program. But so on that note, there's been some excellent points covered across all speakers. Thank you so much. I'd love to give open up the floor and give the opportunity for all of you guys to deep dive into what we've been talking about and ask any questions that you have. We'd obviously love to hear if you agree or would like to challenge anything that's been covered, but you can enter your questions into the chat now. But I will kick off the questions just with one that is directed to Alice. Part of helping mentees to improve is by providing feedback. So do you have any advice on how to pass on negative feedback without discouraging your mentee?
Well, yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. And I have a few different thoughts on this, actually. The first one, which I think is important in any professional relationship and also personal relationship, but we're here to talk about professional relationship, is just even before you have feedback, you want to really build trust in your in your relationship. And so build trust, what I mean by that is that you want to get to a point where your mentee believes you have good intent towards them, that you're here to help them get better. Because I think if you don't have that, however much you prepare for feedback, it's going to be really difficult for them to hear it without to hear it and to think that it's actually a positive. So you want to build trust, and that's a lot of the time that comes with just asking questions about them and who they are, sharing some things about yourself, just building that personal relationship, having some conversations, so that they see that you're a human and you want good things. And then there's kind of a few different things. It kind of depends on the feedback. But I think one thing that is really important is to really ask yourself, what is it that you want to give them as feedback? Is it that you just do things differently and you feel like they should do it they should do things the way that you do them? Or is it that they're not meeting like specific expectations that you have? Because if it's just about, them doing things the way you do it, you don't want to, like, that's not feedback. That's saying like, hey, like, I noticed you did it that way. Like, why, like, this is interesting. I typically do it that other way. Like, what's your reasoning here? And you may even learn something from them. But if it is that, like they, and that's maybe more of a manager thing than a mentor thing, but, they are just not, they take on the problem and they're just not asking questions and they're spending a lot more time than you would expect on it. What you want to approach is just setting your expectation and say something about the expectation, not about the story. You don't want to say something about why you believe they're doing this. You just want to say, hey, like, I'd like to give you some feedback. That's also a tip of mine. Like, if you have a hard conversation to do, start with, hey, like, this may be a bit of a difficult conversation, or hey, like, I have some feedback for you. And this just sets the tone so that they're prepared, but also for yourself. Like, once you have said this, you're committed, you have to go for it, right? So that's a little bit of a psychological trick. And then say something like, well, I've noticed that currently you are doing this, and my expectation is that other thing. Currently, you're like, last feature you took a week to do before you took a week on it before you came to me and asked me some questions, and I expect you to do this in the first few days. And because this is not what I expect, I will need you to change. I will need you to do these things faster next time. What do you think about it? And then open to them and discuss together what can be done. You may have some ideas of actions, but you first want to hear their part of the story, and you really want to stay on the expectation side and not on the side of like, do things that way, but more, I expect this goal. How can we talk together about like you achieving this goal? And then finally, what I wanted to say is, it's interesting because the question is phrased like, how do we give that negative feedback without discouraging them. And I think, first of all, feedback should be constructive. And I know maybe some people say, well, constructive is just another word to not say like it's negative, but the idea of constructive is that you're always giving feedback for them to get better. If you're just giving feedback for them to be miserable, then that's not feedback, don't give it. But if you are really doing this in the spirit of helping them get better, and you have established that trust, then the best thing I can say is like typically it feels so much better on both sides once this has happened. And on the moment it doesn't, on the moment it can be real difficult, it can be a hard conversation. But if you're postponing it, I think it's sometimes a bit of a fallacy to say that I'm postponing it so that they don't get discouraged. A lot of the time you're postponing it because you don't want to feel bad. You don't want to be in that difficult situation. You don't want them to resent you. And so have that difficult conversation. It will be better afterwards, is my advice. Just, yeah. And I've seen it, by the way. I've seen so many junior developers who were maybe doing not as well as their manager expected, and then they got feedback. And when they got feedback, they finally understood, wait, like, I didn't know what was wrong. Now I know, and I gave them so much agency to get better. So it is really powerful.
Thank you, Alice. We've got a question for Kimberly. So how should the cadence of mentoring sessions, I guess, change over time? And when developers reach mid-level, how do you monitor progress?
I think the main thing is setting goals. I think it's hard as the mentor to be like, oh, you're now a mid developer. Oh, now you're now a senior developer. I think setting those goals with a timeline of, okay, you've said you wanted to learn Python. Let's set it so that, you give yourself a time, like let's set 2 hours a week or 3 hours a week where you're going to sit and do Python, and then measure it that way. And I think that's the best way of setting, again, those really clear goals, so that junior developer, that mentee knows that their progress and they can see that progression. A good thing about these sessions is I think that you should say how you want them to happen. And so again, a bit harder now because we're virtual, but ask your mentee, like, how do you want to conduct these meetings? Should we go to a coffee shop so we leave the office so that you're so that we're in an environment where you feel safe? Shall we go for a walk? It's a really nice opportunity to leave the office. And so I think setting goals and making sure that the mentee feels comfortable in the environment, talking about, because if they need to say something bad, they should be in an environment where they feel safe, and that might not be in the office. That could be going for a walk or in a coffee shop, or so I think very clear goals that are achievable goals with a timeline, I think, is the key thing to track that junior developer's progression.
Excellent. Thank you, Kimberly. And I think one quick little question for Lynn is, you obviously experience a mentoring program. Is there anything that you would do differently if you were to then become a mentor?
Ooh, yeah, absolutely. I think when you're a junior, it's very hard to know what you don't know, if I'm being honest. It's impossible. So I think a really important thing to do as a mentor is to help your mentee articulate the unknowns to you. It's incredibly important. Rather than hand-holding, it's more important to give sort of an articulation of all the things that you could possibly know in the world around engineering at your grade, at this level, in this current position at this company, and articulate that. Because I think just starting off, it almost is a bit of an overwhelming feeling at the beginning, where you're just faced with so many unknowns. It's hard to know what you need to know in order to progress at this faster pace. So it's very much tied to what Kimberly was referring to earlier about having a clear sort of personal development plan, having a clear articulation of what goals you want to achieve at these sort of timelines. So I think if I were to then become a mentor, I probably would help define a much sort of clearer expectation and spec over what I could be, what are the unknowns for me, and what can we start chipping our way at week by week in terms of what can I learn on this week to develop myself here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lynn. So to just close off, is there any other questions from the audience? Or I'll wait sort of a moment to just see if anything comes through. Just a quick question to Kimberly. Ashley would like to know, she's checked CodeBar website and looks like you're only looking for coaches in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Ruby, Python, and Git. Is that true?
So that is not true, and maybe I need to change the wording on our website, because they're our tutorials, they're ones that we've written, they're our open source ones, but actually when our students sign up, there is an option for other. And so what often happens, I'd say every workshop, regardless of our location, we always have a few with the option of other. And that's when it varies, because that's when someone will bring their project and they'll say, oh, I'm building a personal project in React and I need a bit of help. And so actually the biggest thing for us is having coaches with all different skills so that we can utilize them for our students as much as possible. So if you're unsure, actually as a coach, when you sign up, we ask you what skills you've got, so you can write down what languages and stuff that and then we'll try to assign you to a student who's after that skill. And I can almost guarantee whatever skill you've got, there will be a student wanting to learn that.
Fantastic, and thank you for the question, Ashley. I would love to sort of finish it up there, and if there's any questions, please reach out to any of us. Thank you so much to the 4 amazing speakers. There was a lot covered, and I think we can all agree that there were a lot of takeaways that we can all implement. We will send a follow-up email after the session with the recording, some contact details if you do have additional questions, and then also the feedback form, which we'd love to hear what you think, and also if there's any other topics that you would like us to include within our masterclass series. We welcome all and any sort of suggestions. But that's it for today, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you at the next session. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.